A legal battle that is going to define the future of our industry is about to begin. Yeah, I know that sounds like very dramatic stuff, but I think we all can understand that Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard would be a humongous move in the industry. And to give you a little bit of color for where today's video is going to go, here is what a Microsoft representative recently said. It's just a bit of a quote, but wow. We believed in giving peace a chance. Them's fighting words. So let's get into it. Let's get into the situation today where the Federal Trade Commission of the United States has confirmed that they will be seeking to block the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. They say that it will allow Microsoft to suppress their competitors and to dominate newly emerging markets of subscription and cloud-based businesses. And this is what they specifically call out in the complaint, right? They have a record of acquiring and using valuable gaming content to suppress competition from rival consoles, including ZeniMax, parent company of Bethesda. Yeah. Microsoft decided to make several of Bethesda's titles, including Starfield and Redfall, exclusives despite assurances it had given to European antitrust authorities that it had no incentive. I think the truth there is that it had multiple incentives. Make more money by selling it everywhere, grow market share of console by selling it only on console, and of course bundling with its, well, as they put it, using it to harm competition in multiple dynamic and fast-growing gaming markets. That means streaming and subscription services. So it very much does seem that when back in the day many of us said, wow, they're going to make the next Skyrim and Starfield be exclusive, that's really bullish. You could say that feels a bit anti-competitive. It does seem that that's coming back to bite them in the arse. And with that, it's no surprise that the FTC says that this means Microsoft would have both the means and the motive to harm competition, resulting in harm to customers. It's an interesting thing. From the perspective of many customers, however, many of them, of course, including many who would really like Blizzard games, they like the idea of this acquisition going forward. And that's because, generally speaking, they've seen Microsoft treat some niches really well, like Flight Sim, like Age of Empires. So to the Blizzard fan who wants StarCraft to exist, the Blizzard fan who wants a Warcraft Reforged not be a disaster, or who doesn't want to feel like they're lining the, I don't know, the golden cladded walls of Bobby Kotick's yacht, this is all quite good. If it goes through, especially because there were rumors that a part of this would implicitly be Bobby Kotick stepping away from leadership after a certain period of time. So it's one of those things where there are large market considerations that the FTC are very concerned about, but many players do feel that the acquisition going in their favor would actually result in them getting a better deal on Game Pass, and of course, potentially a better future for some of the intellectual properties and titles that they like, much in the same way that the acquisition of Eidos Montreal by the Embracer Group was very positively met by fans of the Deus Ex franchise. It's one of those things, macroeconomic factors, those are one thing, but to the gamer who just wants a StarCraft to be good and doesn't think that Activision management would greenlight a new StarCraft, well, that's a different kettle of fish. So they do think that, yeah, they have the means and motive to harm competition, that it could result in harm to consumers. The FTC has concerns this would mean Microsoft would become an even larger player in the gaming space for subscription and cloud-based gaming markets, and that this would stifle innovation. Now, of course, there are very much counter-arguments to this, which I will get into very soon, because Microsoft has lost to Sony, and PS Plus has always been quite massive, and now Sony has a very viable competitor to Microsoft Game Pass, which certainly would make some people have a little bit of a second look at all of this, especially in a world where, of course, Destiny's being acquired by Sony. Now, that said, it doesn't really seem that there's been threats of, say, Destiny 2 being pulled away from Xbox or anything like that. Now, the commission voted 3-1 on this. The commissioner actually, she voted no, but the others did vote yes. Now, Microsoft have been on a big public relations tour lately, specifically trying to make things be favorable to them. That's because they have a meeting with the Federal Trade Commission this week. And as a part of this media tour, a number of key stories happened. So here we have Phil Spencer, of course, is heading up the gaming division of Xbox. He said that they've entered a 10-year commitment to bring COD to Nintendo. Now that is a very interesting thing. There's really two ways it could happen. Number one would be a streaming-based solution, as has been tried by some other publishers out there. The other one, of course, would be the new Call of Duty Mobile, right? It's the sort of thing, it would be architected so that it could actually run on a Switch, given that it's a highly scalable mobile game, and it would offer Nintendo players the opportunity to do Warzone and things like that. And what is very interesting is the new way that they're doing COD Mobile and Warzone and all of that is going to mean that while you are not playing mainline Call of Duty game content, you actually can progress your Call of Duty Battle Pass, like for your, main Call of Duty games, by playing the mobile version. So that's the sort of thing that actually could work quite well for Nintendo, and I can confirm to you, having played COD Mobile with the Backbone gaming controller on my phone, it is a remarkably effective and fun experience, so it would be a true value add to Nintendo, as much as many of us would think, huh, Switch, Call of Duty, that makes no sense. Well, many would say that Apex Legends doesn't make sense on it, yet we see that exploding in Japan. Also, Phil Spencer has committed that they will be bringing, Call of Duty over to Steam, which is an interesting little thing. So for Nintendo, I think I've explained that. Of course, Gabe Newell himself, who does own Valve, he said that Phil and the games team at Microsoft have always followed through on what they told us they would do, so we trust their intentions. We think Microsoft has all the motivation they need to be on the platforms and devices where Call of Duty customers want to be. You could see a little bit of that being Gabe saying, COD people are on PlayStation, the incentives are for Microsoft to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation. Because I think ultimately, it's Call of Duty that's the thing here. In the same way that FIFA dominates football games and the Madden games dominate the American football games, right? And what's interesting, and what I would absolutely call fighting talk, is Brad Smith of Microsoft saying, all these terms are open to PlayStation when they want to come to the table. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? So, if what he's saying is true, does it mean that it's a bad deal? Or does it mean that PlayStation is refusing? Because PlayStation could actually think that this deal would be great for them to take. But we, of course, have to introduce game theory to this situation. There is always the chance that PlayStation perhaps won't enjoy lining the pockets of their main competitor, who, already has a quite large cash advantage over them, by, Call of Duty sales going to Microsoft. Because if COD sales go to Activision Blizzard, that's fine. They're going to make more Call of Duty and things like that, and Overwatch, which will go onto a PlayStation. You see what I mean? It's the sort of thing where there's a lot of nuance to the corporate decision-making that could be at play here. But seemingly, in spite of all of this, they've been unable to sway the FTC. As for my personal opinion here, I would say that if a 10-year deal was reached with Sony, I really think that that would do a fair bit to really solve the issue. Because Sony would then understand, okay, we have 10 years, let's get to work. Sony, in fact, are already investing in multiple free-to-play live service titles. One of them is, in fact, led by ex-Treyarch developers. I think it's quite interesting that it does show that Sony are preparing for a reality where perhaps Call of Duty is not humongous on the PlayStation platform. Ultimately, though, when it comes to the consoles, Sony have benefited from a broad public perception that, yeah, Microsoft has Halo and Forza, but, we have the big blockbuster games, and we're the best place for multiplats, which is why PlayStation has historically done so well. I will, of course, say I own both an Xbox Series X and a PlayStation 5, and I am remarkably happy with both consoles. I think they offer both a tremendous value. Okay, so the arguments. We've seen a lot of this before. The idea here is that Game Pass is a potential threat to newer subscription models, where there's nothing stopping Microsoft from denying games to other services. Okay. You could then say in the same way, though, yeah, but Sony's not putting Uncharted or Horizon on Xbox Game Pass. Right? Are we just talking about Call of Duty here? Kind of interesting. And also, as a potential customer here, I'll say, I've subscribed to Game Pass for a long time. I think the Game Pass is an utter no-brainer. I think the Game Pass is also great in how it encourages people to have a more varied gaming diet. So I think it's an awesome program, and any independent developers that I've talked to have been involved with Game Pass. They have really sung the praises of the Microsoft team, who've been great to work for, and the overall situation that they've got from Game Pass. So it seems so far that it's working out excellently for customers, excellently for developers, and excellently for publishers. I actually do imagine that quite the same thing is going on with the new revamped PS Plus. Ultimately, though, when I think about these competing subscription models, I think about PS Plus, I think about Game Pass, and I think, well, okay, but Sony does have a humongous advantage in terms of units sold. They have sold way more PlayStation 5s than Xbox have sold Xboxes. Now that does mean that the total addressable market for the console audience anyway of PlayStation subscription service is larger because they won in the PS4 generation where their subscription service is available, and they've so far won in terms of console sales on this generation where Microsoft hasn't. So Microsoft definitely has a strong first mover advantage in this space, but I do think that overall Sony are in a tremendously competitive position. Now, in the cloud streaming space, Microsoft undeniably do have an advantage with Azure and all of that, but, you know, Sony, they acquired Gaikai, they've actually ran PlayStation Now fairly successfully for quite a long period of time. Right now, a lot of legacy titles are available via streaming. It doesn't seem like it's fundamentally a situation where Microsoft acquiring Activision Blizzard kills Sony's ability to do either of these things if Microsoft were to accept a 10-year deal. Rather, if Sony were to accept a 10-year deal, because thus far, it does seem like that is open to them. The question, though, would be, would Sony have perhaps less good terms than Nintendo? I mean, per Brad, it doesn't seem to be the case. Maybe this is a situation, as I said, where Sony would be more than happy to actually just take the deal and, you know, but I think they know that if they have a chance that they could harm their largest competitor, they will. I think Sony knows that it's done fantastically off absolute blockbuster games and a fantastic console, but I think Sony is also very well aware that Microsoft has a humongous enterprise business that Sony doesn't. Microsoft is, in terms of market cap, a significantly larger company. I think Sony understands that if Microsoft really wanted to turn around and burn cash for growth, they probably could in a way that they can't. It's funny, it reminds me of a fun little investing thing of, you know, the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. And I think in a case like this, Microsoft could absolutely just juice things to the tits with Xbox and outspend Sony in a way that Sony just could not compete with. I have to wonder if that is why Sony is really trying to play hard here. Just a suspicion. But anyway, TLDR, the worry is Microsoft will end up with too much power. We've heard this from the FTC, we've heard this from the United Kingdom, CMA, we've heard it from EU bodies. Doesn't mean it's the end of the arguments, though. So Brad Smith did speak to The Verge. He effectively declared war. That's where the quote I gave to you at the very start of this episode came from. We believed in giving peace a chance. We have complete confidence in our case, and we welcome the opportunity to present it in court. Hey, them's fighting words, right? Their head of communication, Frank Shaw, shared a link to their statement, just showing, you know, they're ready to go. It relitigates the purchase of ZeniMax and Bethesda, pointing out that they agreed to honor all existing contracts and review everything relating to future decisions on a case-by-case basis. Now, in those cases, they've made it exclusive, which to the FTC, well, it'll give them the willies. And that did mean that we had the hilarious situation of Xbox-owned studios making PlayStation exclusives, which, you know, is kind of hilarious, but I think we all understand that it looked like that was a bit of a bizarre teething situation, and multiple data points equals a trend line, and they've all been trending exclusive. And even with in the context of the 10-year deal, if Call of Duty is still king of the castle, and Microsoft says, well, deal's over, COD's on Xbox now, a lot of people are going to only have Xbox as their choice. Now, here's where it gets strange. You know the way I read out that line from the FTC earlier about Microsoft breaking their word with the EU? So here's the weird thing about that. They actually did not. They didn't tell the EU that, and the EU have even confirmed it. And that does mean that the FTC have actually managed to be, well, straight up misinformed, which, to be honest, is rather shocking given the overall gravity of this situation. I mean, we're talking about a $67 billion acquisition. One would think that they would not make mistakes. To many people, then, it feels like this means that the bottom is falling out of the FTC's argument, but that is kind of missing some detail, and it's not fully engaging with the wording of the complaint. So one of the reasons that the EU was willing to accept the ZeniMax without conditions thing was based on their own understanding on their conversations with Microsoft, which is highlighted here by Ethan Gatch of Kotaku. Seems wrong to think Starfall and Redfall becoming exclusive didn't undermine the EU's analysis. It repeatedly makes the argument in favor of the merger on the theory that Microsoft was not incentivized to do what it in fact did. So it's interesting. Microsoft basically said that any potential exclusivity would be heavily based on Xbox not losing out. So not losing, a shit ton of revenue from selling the game over on PlayStation. And, therefore, we don't need any binding agreements. It wouldn't make sense. Now, who knows what goes on? Maybe Microsoft is getting some weak signals from their corporate intelligence that says, lads, we should maybe have more exclusives because we are having issues with our, there's more PlayStations being sold, help. Okay, well, now the incentives have changed, pull the lever, exclusive. So Microsoft never explicitly said we will not make games exclusive. They said I think a fair truth that they would not be financially incentivized to make the game exclusive. But then they did it anyway, I would say because perhaps they were market share incentivized, which really is just a long-term financial incentive that kind of goes beyond the scope of the sales of a single game, much in the same way that consoles are sold at a bit of a loss because, losing money in the console, that's not important. Growing the size of the market and then earning on the platform, that's where we make the money. And perhaps that's why we're in a situation where a regulator is going to want something a lot more concrete than what happened last time around. Now, of course, it takes two to acquire a company. Bobby Kotick did release a statement, went to staff. We have some excerpts here. Sounds alarming. Want to reinforce my confidence it'll close. We believe these will win despite a regulatory environment that is focused on ideology and misconceptions about the tech industry. Essentially, look, Bobby is just trying to play on some of the tribalism, right? Or the way America is, I suppose he would probably see the FTC as led by Lena Khan as just not being particularly in favor of a company like his. He would then probably say, well, this is just, politicking. This is just, virtue signaling to the base. And then, we would end up in some silly, annoying political argument that, is going to be used to sway people on an ideological basis. I think that's where Bobby's going with that. It's a card he can play. It's definitely something that's moving a little bit more in the fighting dirty way. Now, of course, this is just the start of things. This was caught by Axios, so credit to them. There's a key detail. The FTC chose to file a complaint in its own administrative court, not in a federal court. The agency is not seeking a preliminary injunction to stop it from closing, so the two parties are likely still to close. So this suggests perhaps that the aim is not to stop the deal entirely. The most likely thing, apparently, is that, and this is why it's great to have journalists and folks who understand this sort of thing so that, we can help explain to you guys what is a fairly opaque and obtuse thing, right? Because, hey, I didn't get into games because I wanted to be an M&A expert. Apparently, we can expect arbitration that will be handled inside so that the deal is still able to close, right? So that would essentially mean a legal agreement in which Microsoft, they'd be bound to that agreement. So basically not just that promise, not just, taken in good faith. The FTC, they don't trust Microsoft in the way that Gabe Newell does. And, hey, government, different kettle of fish. So ultimately then, here's what I'll say to you. I think the FTC are going to move forward as much as they can. And I basically think that the conclusion of this video is what's going to happen. So I think we can expect the deal to go through. However, I can also, or will also expect, not just a contract between companies that, could be violated in a very dirty way that could maybe result in people being sued, but a contract between Microsoft and, I suppose, the federal government, where Microsoft says, for the sake of maintaining competition in the market, we, do solemnly commit to Call of Duty being on PlayStation for whatever foreseeable future. Maybe the FTC would say to Microsoft, next console cycle. It has to be there for the next console cycle if it's still going as a franchise. Maybe if that happens, then we get the deal going through. Okay, final sidebar. A little bit of now my own personal opinion. Now, this is based on what I feel is best for the games that I care about, which, because, you know how it is, right? I do think, look, I love StarCraft. It's one of my favorite games of all time. And I think that I would be able to have some StarCraft 3. I think it'll be more likely if Microsoft owns them, because look how well Microsoft treated the Age of Empires community. I mean, between Definitive Edition, AoE 4, which I've really enjoyed, Microsoft, you know, Halo's obviously being an issue. I think they know it's an issue as well. I've recently covered on the channel, I think, increasingly good sentiment there. And it's going to take action over time for more people to believe that, and that's okay. I absolutely do not begrudge you for being suspicious, because if Halo has been like... I know what it's like having the game that you care about the most. For me, it's probably World of Warcraft, but Halo fans, I mean, we've been through the ringer with WoW. You guys have been through the ringer with Halo. I get it. What you guys need to see is a game, you know, that is as Dragonflight is to Warcraft right now. But look, for the games that I enjoy, I do think that Microsoft would be a better steward of those IPs. That is my own personal belief. I think that Microsoft would be good for World of Warcraft. I also think that for a lot of the employees of Activision Blizzard, frankly, they're not comfortable under Bobby Kotick and his leadership team that, you know, includes some sketchy folks from their perspective. Bobby, of course, a very controversial figure. A lot of the staff feel like Bobby's repeatedly thrown them under the bus. Seems pretty credible that Bobby was underplaying, you know, harassment stuff that he knew about. There was those leaks that the idea would be that, you know, yes, Bobby would get a golden parachute, but at least for the employees, they'd be angry about that, but also they'd be thinking, Phil Spencer or Bobby Kotick? Anyone's going to choose Phil Spencer. I'm not trying to be mean to Bobby Kotick as a human. I think people are going to rightly think that Phil's a more decent chap. And I think that the people who work in the franchises that I've put a lot of my life into that I really enjoy, I think that they will be more comfortable under Microsoft leadership. So that is why, from a personal perspective, I kind of am for this, with the caveat that Call of Duty is multi-plat. So that's my personal opinion based on my own personal incentives. Of course, there's a very valid discussion to have about the place of competition in the market. Now the discussion goes to you. I would love to know what you think about this, and I suppose if it just ends up being a situation of there's a COD deal and it goes through, who knows? I mean, if you're a PlayStation player, you may lose a few Bethesda titles, and that's a bit rough. If you're a Blizzard player, maybe you'll get StarCraft 3. It's different incentives for different people, eh? And I suppose that's why sometimes, you know, things get a wee bit heated between the owners of consoles and PCs, etc. I'd love to know what you think. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you next time.